Nobody tells you how quiet a house gets after divorce. Not the kind of quiet you enjoy on a Sunday morning with coffee and nowhere to be, but the kind that presses against your chest at 2 in the morning, when you reach for someone who isn't there anymore, and your hand finds nothing but cold sheets. That was the quiet Daniel Mercer had learned to live inside. He was 38 years old, with calloused hands, a truck that needed new brakes, and 2 kids who still believed their dad was the greatest man alive. Emma was 9, Lucas was 6, and every single morning, no matter how exhausted Daniel was from his overnight shift at the Millbrook Hotel, hauling luggage, fixing broken ice machines, mopping lobbies that never seemed to stay clean, he woke up at 6:15, made breakfast, packed their lunches, and walked them to the bus stop every single morning. That morning was no different, except that it was. He'd packed the lunches the night before, leftover turkey sandwiches from dinner. A little dry maybe, but the kids never complained. He'd pressed them into wax paper the way his own mother used to do, tucked a small note inside each one, a smiley face for Lucas, a tiny heart for Emma, folded the wax paper ends like envelopes. It had taken him 11 minutes. He knew because he'd been watching the clock, calculating how much sleep he could still squeeze in. At the bus stop, Emma had thrown her arms around his waist. "Dad, you smell like the hotel again." "Good morning to you too, sweetheart." Lucas had looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes. "Dad, are we poor?" Daniel crouched down to his son's level, right there on the sidewalk in the pale morning light. He looked at the boy, at the untied shoelace, the small backpack covered in dinosaur patches, the innocent expression that had no idea. It was asking the hardest question in the world. "We're rich in all the things that matter," Daniel said quietly. Lucas considered this with the deep seriousness of a 6-year-old philosopher. "Like sandwiches?" Daniel laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised him. "Exactly like sandwiches." He kissed them both, watched the bus swallow them up, and then stood there alone on the sidewalk for a moment longer than necessary, just breathing, just letting himself exist in the space between being a father and being everything else he had to be. Then he drove to Harlow and Stone. Harlow and Stone Capital was the kind of company whose lobby made you feel instantly that you had made several wrong turns in life. Marble floors, glass walls that revealed floor after floor of people and expensive clothes doing expensive things, a receptionist who smiled at you in a way that somehow communicated you were slightly below the minimum threshold for being smiled at. Daniel had been hired as a temporary facilities coordinator, a title that meant he fixed things, moved things, cleaned things, and generally existed in the parts of the building that the actual employees preferred not to think about. He'd been placed there through a temp agency 3 weeks ago. It paid $14 more per hour than the hotel, and he needed the money desperately. Emma needed braces. The truck needed brakes. Life needed money, and money needed work, and so Daniel worked. He was in the break room on the 14th floor, restocking the filtered water station when she walked in. Catherine Harlow. He didn't know who she was. He would learn later, much later, that she was the Catherine Harlow, co-founder, CEO, the woman whose name was literally on the building. At that moment, she was simply a woman in a charcoal blazer who moved through spaces as if they had been designed specifically for her use, which in this case they had been. She was on the phone. She stopped near the coffee station without looking at him, selected a pod, slid it into the machine with practiced efficiency. Daniel's lunch bag was on the counter beside the machine. He'd forgotten it there. The brown paper bag with the leftover sandwich he'd packed for himself, the same way he packed for the kids, wax paper, folded ends. It had his name written on it in Lucas's handwriting from the night before, when his son had insisted on helping. Catherine Harlow glanced at it. Something shifted in her expression, not cruelty exactly, but the particular brand of amusement that the very comfortable sometimes feel in the presence of the very ordinary. She said something into the phone, quietly, but Daniel was close enough to hear. "Hold on, Marcus. I'm looking at a grown man's lunch bag that says Daddy on it in crayon. I'm not sure if that's sweet or just sad." A small laugh. "Okay, sad. Definitely sad." She took her coffee and walked out. Daniel stood very still for a moment. He looked at the lunch bag, at his son's careful 6-year-old handwriting, at the letter D that listed slightly to the left because Lucas hadn't learned to keep his letters straight yet. He picked up the bag, folded the top down neatly, and went back to work. 3 days later, the temp agency called him with an unexpected message. The placement at Harlow and Stone was being converted to a permanent position, not facilities, but operations management. Someone had flagged his file. An internal review had noted the way he'd single-handedly resolved the HVAC crisis on the 22nd floor, reorganized the supply chain for building maintenance, saving the company approximately $40,000 annually, and drafted a 6-page efficiency report that no one had asked him to write, but that had somehow made its way to the executive suite. The salary was 4 times what he was currently making. He almost didn't believe it. He sat in his truck in the parking garage and read the email 3 times. Then he called his mother and held the phone without saying anything for a long moment.
"Danny, you there?"
"Yeah, Mom, I'm here." His first day in the new role, they gave him an office on the 14th floor. A real one, with a door that closed and a window that looked out over the city. He stood at that window for a long time before sitting down. The orientation was scheduled to include a brief introduction to the executive leadership team. He'd been told the CEO would stop by to say hello. A formality. Nothing significant. He was reading through onboarding documents when the door opened. Catherine Harlow walked in. She stopped. He watched her face move through several distinct stages. Recognition. Slow, then sudden. The coffee station. The brown bag. The thing she'd said into the phone. He could see her remembering it, assembling it in real time, and then understanding what it meant that he was sitting behind this desk. "Mr. Mercer," she said carefully. "Miss Harlow." He stood, extended his hand. Professional, steady. "It's a pleasure." Her handshake was firm. Her expression was composed. The way people compose themselves when they are aware they have made an error and are calculating how to address it. "I understand you'll be heading up operations management. Your background it's impressive. Thank you." A pause. The silence in the room had weight. "I want to apologize," she said. And to her credit, genuine credit, the kind you can't fake, she said it directly, without hiding it inside some softer construction. "The break room. What I said on the phone. I didn't know you were, it wouldn't have been appropriate regardless of who you were." Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into his desk drawer and set something on the surface between them. A folded piece of wax paper. She looked at it confused. "My son packed my lunch today," Daniel said simply. "He's 6. He wrote my name on the bag again. He's been doing it since he was 4. When I explained to him that the other people in the break room might accidentally take it, he paused. He thinks it's very responsible." Catherine Harlow looked at the wax paper square. Something moved across her face. Something real. Something that had nothing to do with boardrooms or blazers. "He sounds like a great kid," she said quietly. "He's the best person I know," Daniel said. "Both of my kids are." She nodded slowly. "I made a judgment about your life from a paper bag and a crayon. That was wrong of me." She met his eyes. "I'd like to earn back the ground I lost there, if that's possible." Daniel considered this. A month ago, he'd been restocking a water station and watching the clock. Now he was sitting in an office with his name on a placard outside. The door and a salary that would get Emma her braces in his truck, its brakes and maybe, finally, a little breathing room. Life had a sense of irony that sometimes felt almost personal. "I think that's possible," he said. 6 months later, the operations division under Daniel Mercer had increased efficiency by 22%. He'd restructured 3 departments, negotiated 2 vendor contracts that saved the company over $250,000, and implemented a new facilities protocol that became the model for the company's satellite offices. He had also become, quietly and without fanfare, one of Catherine Harlow's most trusted people, not because he was brilliant, though he was, but because he was honest in the way that people who have had to be honest with themselves every hard morning tend to be honest with everyone. Emma got her braces. Lucas learned to write his letters straight, though he still put a slight leftward tilt on the letter D, which Daniel had stopped trying to correct because he'd decided he liked it that way. On a Tuesday in November, Daniel sat at his desk eating lunch, turkey sandwich, wax paper, folded ends, when Catherine Harlow knocked on the open door. "Board presentation prep," she said. "Conference room B, 15 minutes?"
"I'll be there."
She glanced at the sandwich. Something warm moved briefly through her expression, and then she nodded and walked away. Daniel finished his sandwich. He folded the wax paper neatly, the way his mother had taught him, the way he had taught himself to do it for the kids. He slid it into the trash. He straightened his jacket. Then he walked down the hall toward the conference room. toward the window views and the long tables and the life that had come to him, not because the world had finally decided to be kind, but because he had kept showing up, quietly, completely, every single morning, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. If you made it this far, then you already know this story was never really about a sandwich. It was about the person who packs one anyway, who tucks a note inside a child's lunch, because a small moment of love costs nothing, who takes a small job and does it like it matters, because for him, everything matters. If this story touched your heart, if you recognized someone in Daniel, or in his kids, or maybe even in Catherine herself, then share it. Pass it on, and if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because this is what we do here. We tell the stories of people who deserve to be seen. See you in the next one.